Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, it's time for us to have a bit of a discussion about an issue that I think is going to be really apparent in Galbrena's kit as time goes on. And that isn't necessarily going to be her baseline abilities or her baseline synergies. It's the fact that her dupes, her sequence node, her resonance chain is just really constraining. What I want to talk about first is simply the idea of a resonance chain, right? Dupes, upgrades, and things like that. I personally think that they should just be a flat damage boost to like a character's kit. They should definitely be something that adds a lot more interesting mechanics. But then they just go ahead and they feel like they're activatable in a lot of different situations. The thing is, Galbrena might have, without a doubt, the most restricting and the most constricting dupes in the game. And the reason for that is actually quite simple. If you look at her S1 over here, there's a lot of text. But the most important bit is seeing the word afterflame in this skill description. And what afterflame is it's essentially a resource that Galbrena builds while she's off field from the usage of other teammates' echo skills. And so you can see over here, right, she holds up to 40 points overall, and when she's in the threshold state, which is when she's like prepping for her rotation, she gains 8 points every single time a resonator on the team, including herself, uses an echo skill, and echoes of the same name, blah, 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 can only, activate it once, right? At a baseline, this mechanic already gives you up to a 60% damage boost, but you can't access that entire damage boost unless you have teammates that are providing echo skills. Which is, in most situations, it's not that big of a deal, right? It's part of her baseline kit. She has, she misses up to like 24%, something along those lines of damage. It is what it is, right? She gets a 36% anyways. But the thing is that when you take a look at her resonance chain, you start taking a look at her sequence nodes, it gets a little bit more restrictive on top of that. Because her sequence nodes are proceeding to upgrade the afterflame mechanic. And so you can view it this way, ladies and gentlemen. There's going to be a baseline level of power upgrade that you get from getting Galbrena's S1, because you're always going to have 3 out of 5 of your needed echo skills to max out your afterflame. But this also means that if you want this full boost over here of up to 80% critical damage, because each stack of afterflame on her S1 is going to give her 2% more crit damage, well, if you don't have echo skill users on your team that have multiple casts, you can't even fully use her S1. I have never truly seen an S1 in this game that is literally this team reliant, in that you can't activate her S1 without the right teammates. That is how it works currently. If you have her S1, you cannot fully activate it unless you have either a Cantarella or, based off the existing kit of Chu Yan from the story, or a Chu Yan. So, to use her S1, you need to have a Chu Yan or a Cantarella. And you're not going to want Cantarella with this person's team because she doesn't buff anything that she does aside from Afterflame. But that's how her S1 works, ladies and gentlemen. Because it directly buffs Afterflame as opposed to just being more of a general upgrade to her kit. Something that would just, boost the motion values or boost the damage of these attacks, rather than requiring the Afterflame to be buffed additionally. You look at all the other S1s in the games, right, for other DPS units, and one that I want to look at in particular is Augusta's, because it works in a similar way. Augusta's S1 just directly buffs the Crown of Will's mechanic. But the thing is, there's no teams where Augusta cannot activate this Crown of Will's mechanic. She's able to maintain full uptime on both of the stacks. It lets her generate a new one as well, regardless of what team she's on and what she's doing. The only requirement for Augusta's S1 is that she has a teammate. It doesn't matter what type of teammate they are. And, she has other nodes and stuff that upgrade it further, but it doesn't feel bad to use. It doesn't feel like you need a specific character on the roster to be able to get the full strength of her S1. And that's the thing. I don't see any other sequence node in the game that has this type of, additional stuff going on. Maybe you could think of, Frolova's S2 as comparable, but guess what? Her S2 also greatly amplifies the number of stacks that she gets by herself, so echo skills feel even, less necessary with all the boosts that she has at a baseline. And so you just look over here, right? None of these other characters, the DPS ones specifically, are feeling like they're getting any restrictions on their sequence nodes that require them to have additional teammates. Cartithia actually loosens her restrictions on teammates with more sequence nodes. But Galbrena, if you don't have a Chuyan and you don't have a Cantarella, when you would never use Cantarella anyways, you can't get the full power out of her S1. It's a weird design decision. I'm not particularly sure what the reason is for it. I'm not sure why she couldn't just get something like her S2, which just gives her 350% more attack whenever she uses, like, any of her abilities, right? Or, sorry, this is more like 70% attack. It's just something like this should be more of, like, the baseline bonus, as opposed to something as convoluted as whatever the hell this is to require a teammate to use it. Because that's a significant damage buff. 80% crit damage is a lot. And you can even look at Zani, right? The character that's like the poster child for needing a partner, needing a teammate. Her sequence nodes also aren't even as bad as Galbrena's. This would be like if Galbrena's sequence node right now reminds me of this. Imagine, you can just look at Zani's skill description, right? When Zani has Blaze, right? I know this is super long, right? When Zani has Blaze, she deals additional damage, right? Additional multiplier per Blaze. That's something that's built into Zani's kit. All of these attacks will deal additional damage if they consume Blaze, which only Spectrofrazzle users on the team can give her. This would be like if Zani's S1 increased the multiplier of that Blaze damage increase, as opposed to just being a 50% spectral damage bonus. But that's the mechanic that Galbrena has baked into her S1. It's on the teammate reliant mechanic. Without teammates, she can't fully max this out. And so without teammates, her sequence node is not going to work at its full strength. Isn't it still 48% crit damage at a baseline? It is, right? It is still a 48%. But literally, you can't get the full value out of a sequence node on your kit without having a teammate to activate it properly. And that is something that we've been looking through all the other kits in the game for a reason. This is not something that any other unit actually has. And this is the thing, ladies and gentlemen. We looked at all the other DPS characters. This situation actually gets worse. Because if you look at Galbrena's nodes, none of them are related at all to her afterflame. None of them at all, right? Lessen the restrictions there. The restrictions only get worse. Because at S6, she has another afterflame mechanic built into her kit. Another one. As if having just one wasn't enough. On her S6, the most expensive node, she's got another source of teammate reliant strength. And that's going to instead be, instead of 80% crit damage, it's going to be 35% fusion damage amplification. Which is actually a shit ton. Yeah, 35% total fusion damage amplification is the highest in the game for a fusion source. And that is, of course, going to be based on the afterflame that you have built up by your teammates. And so, this unit on their S1 and S6, 80% crit damage, and then 35% fusion damage amplification. They require a Chuyan or a Cantarella to use properly. And if you do not have them, you cannot fully activate her sequence nodes. This is a really important topic for me to discuss for one specific reason. Because currently, this unit's only viable team to clear endgame, and they're good in it, is the Mono Fusion team. This is their current best team in the game at the state of their release. And so you can't even use the full power of her sequence nodes in this team because of how restrictive they are in entirely addressing Afterflame for a whole 2 out of 6 nodes. That's the reality of this character. In their top performing team, getting them to S6 or getting them to S1, you can't fully access the power of her sequence nodes. And I'm just going to be real over here. It's the most puzzling design decision I've ever seen. It is the most puzzling design decision I've ever seen. It feels wrong. I'm not entirely sure what the player base's thoughts are on this matter. There's one reality of the situation. If you're pulling Chu-Yan, as long as we have, I'll just pull up his kit from some of the prior images some of my mods took. If you plan on pulling Chu-Yan, one thing is going to be clear, right? This unit has 3 echo skills baked into their kit. They have echo skill buffs on their Sonata set. Their outro skill, according to the 2.7 story playtest, is going to give a 50% echo skill damage amplification. So, without a doubt at all, right, you are going to be able to maximize the power of everything Galbrena has in her kit if you pull a Chu-Yan. This is also the other thing. If you want to use her sequence nodes at their full efficiency, you also have to pull Chu-Yan. Because otherwise, there's no other way to fully activate these, like, in the game, other than to run, like, some weird-ass Cantarella team. And that, to me, this is some of the most restrictive ones I've ever seen. And I do think that Kuro Games really needs to start thinking a lot more about how they're designing these at a baseline, because a sequence node that can only be activated by having one unit on the roster, and it's also a unit that hasn't been released yet, I don't think that that's particularly great direction, especially for the design of these, because you could have made these way more universal. You didn't need to look into the afterflame mechanic and make it like more, and make it have more weight. That wasn't something that needed to happen, but it did, and now we have an S6, a potentially S6 character that can't even fully access the power of their S6 on the best team that they have on release. And that is just odd. That's just strange. And some people might be presenting the argumentation, right? Oh, why would you even pull a character sequence nodes anyways if you weren't going to pull their best in slot, right? It's like, oh, why would you even pull Augusta sequence nodes if you're not going to pull Yuno? Why would you pull Zadi sequence nodes if you're not going to pull Phoebe? So on and so forth, right? And I think the reality of the situation that a lot of people don't necessarily understand is the fact that Chu-Yan is this character's best in slot, and Chu-Yan is the phase after this character's banner. So the only actual way for you to have this character sequence nodes and their best in slot is to pull the sequence nodes first and then get their best in slot. Because once Chu-Yan's banner is here, right, this character's banners leaves and you can't get their sequence nodes anymore. So you literally have to get them in advance. And the situation I'm talking about, ladies and gentlemen, is quite clear. If you're getting your sequence nodes and you're getting your best in slot, there's going to be a X amount of days span of time, hope you don't lose your 50-50 either on Chu-Yan's banner, where you're not going to be able to use these sequence nodes properly. And that by itself is just, I really do think it's one of the most baffling design decisions I've ever seen. And if that's not clear, if like the kind of like ordering over there, the necessity, all of that isn't clear, I don't know what other explanation would have worked for you. But hopefully it's a bit more clear to see why her sequence nodes are some of the worst designed in the game. We've taken a look at all of these different DPS characters and all of their different sequence nodes, and there's just nothing there that has this level of, like, teammate reliance. I think the only one that I can think about is, like, Yuno's S2, but Yuno herself always benefits from this anyways at the start of her rotation because she maxes it out. It's more so the fact that her S2 as a team buff only works on one other unit, but that gives... well, that makes people reliant on her versus her reliant on other units. It's just a matter of, like, that as well. You know, it's a situation that I feel like could blow up and potentially get worse in the future. So I just want to make sure I'm doing my due diligence to address it right now. Because this is something that I don't really want to see happen in any more kits, having sequence nodes that are reliant on another limited character. It's just a little goofy. That will be that for that one, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know what you all thought about our breakdown here and whether or not you share the same thoughts. Peace out.